is John Goff. I'm from the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, and it's really a privilege to see you all here tonight, not only because it's been a long time since we've had an in-person story slam, but here at the college we increasingly think of our Mutter Museum not just as a museum of medical history, but as a museum of social history. You come not just to learn about a condition like Freiberg dysplasia ossificans progressiva, you come to learn about the individuals, Harry Eastlack and Carol Orzel, that lived with that condition. And that's why it's so important to us that you're here to share your stories with us tonight. So thank you all for being here. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to tonight's Master of Ceremonies, Delaware.
Thank you, John. And welcome to what is now our fourth annual Story Slam. We got a little delayed during the pandemic and had one on Zoom. But I'll echo what John said a minute ago, which is that it's very nice to be able to do this again in person. We're still, still dealing with the effects of the pandemic and wearing masks, but the speakers do not need to wear masks when you're telling your story. Speakers take your mask off. These story slams we started doing and inspired, I think, in part by the American College of Physicians that did this about 5 years ago. My partner in crime at Temple, Mike Vitez, who's here in the front row, decided to hold a Temple story slam, and so we did. We invited people from Temple to have a story slam and tell their stories that are related to medicine, and it was wonderful. Telling stories about the things that are meaningful in what we do, about our patients and our own experiences in medicine, is really makes the whole practice of medicine much more profound and satisfying and more connected. I think we also have a tendency to be isolated in medicine, and telling the stories tends to bring people together. So it's a healing process. We started doing these story slams. We organized it, and we encouraged all of the medical schools in the Philadelphia area to send storytellers and pick them in whatever way was the most convenient. But for those who weren't already doing their own storytelling events, and there were other schools that had already picked up that habit, but for those who weren't, we encouraged them to do it, to hold their own events and find their best storytellers and bring them here for this is essentially the all-star game of storytelling in medical schools in Philadelphia. So I hope we will have some compelling stories. I'm sure we will, if the past is any guide to what to expect. This event has, for several years now, been co-sponsored by two groups that are affiliated with the College of Physicians, the section on medicine and the arts, which I'm the chair of, and also the Delaware Valley Medical Student Wellness Collaborative, which is a group of leaders in the medical schools around Philadelphia who are dedicated to finding ways to encourage well-being in medical students. We know that's also something that has been challenged for everyone, but medical school is a particularly tough time for that. Actually, I want to talk for a second just about the basic ground rules here. Each school was invited to field 2 storytellers. One of them had to be a medical student. The other one could be a physician or a medical student at any level of training or practice. So that's what we have here for our speakers. This is a heated competition for bragging rights among the different medical schools. So you as the audience are going to decide your favorite stories, and we'll give out prizes. Now, in reality, we love all of our storytellers, and we actually have a prize for all of them. We think that they win just by being here, and we win by having them here. But we just for bragging rights, we are going to do a vote at the end. So we will start, and I'll also read the brief bios that the storytellers have given us for the program. Dr. Maria Lopez is a professor and vice chair of medical oncology at Sidney Kimmel Medical College. She describes herself as an ameliorist, one who seeks to make things better, and as a mentor, she helps mentees find and grow their secret power and inner joy. She appreciates this opportunity to share. So Dr. Lopez is going to give us her reflections on racism and disparities.
As I prepared for today, I first reflected on the question that initially brought this topic to mind. Yes, this is a time where there is growing attention to racism and disparities, and it has been lifetimes in the making. I was born in Bolivia, the daughter of physician parents, second-generation woman physician, first language Spanish. My parents would generally speak with me in Spanish. At some point, I began to respond in English. I wasn't even aware of the shift until a classmate commented, "It's funny, they talk with you in Spanish and you answered in English." I hadn't even noticed. I awakened early to the concept of inequity. You see, I grew up in Chicago in the 60s, and although I didn't fully understand the social changes around me, I could see that there were haves and have-nots. And if you did not have, you were seen as just less. And as a child, the injustice rang clear. I grew up, I went to college, I awakened to the impact of gender, how simply being female led to assumptions about my ability or lack thereof. I studied philosophy, I learned to think critically, I went to medical school, I struggled with embracing the experience of medical school for fear about how the experience might shape me. I met Dr. Victor Seidel through Physicians for Social Responsibility. I was introduced to the words of Rudolf Virchow. Medicine is a social science, and politics is nothing else but medicine on a large scale. I felt affirmed. I experienced patient care. Early on as a medical student, in one of my very first-year preceptorship experiences, my preceptor asked me to speak with a patient who had been admitted overnight with congestive heart failure. She only spoke Spanish. She had been in the hospital overnight without the benefit of an interpreter. He assumed that a girl with the name of Maria Lopez would know how to speak Spanish, and he was right. I had never experienced a need to speak Spanish outside of conversations with my parents or their friends. ¿Cómo está, señora? How are you, ma'am? She grabbed my hand. I remember her grip as one of desperate recognition. Señorita, me ahogo. Miss, I'm drowning. Pienso que me muero. I think I'm dying. I had no significant medical knowledge, but I was able to speak with her with words that she understood and ease her worry, at least a little. And for the first time ever, I felt my ability to speak Spanish was of value. And I became aware of the internalized racism that had prevented me from speaking with my parents in Spanish. Awareness, powerful and essential for action. Action. How do we move to action? Reflection. Reflection is always a good place to start, to see how far we have come, to see how we got here, and to discern a path forward. Reflection and critical thought can bring us hope, understanding, and the power to share, to disseminate our lessons learned, and to discern. What are the forces that make change? What is the fear that underlies? What is the path to common ground? What does rational hope even look like? There are both individual and collective answers to this inquiry: to reflect and then to share. And what of my path? I have celebrated my native language and culture with my children. My academic engagement has focused on studying, developing, and disseminating best practices to increase access to care. I have mentored students, trainees, and faculty to find joy. And I continue to engage patients and communities with awareness, recognition, and respect for the strength of cultural perspectives, paths, and beliefs. Oh, And when my parents and I speak these days, we do speak in a common language. Thank you for your attention.
So our second speaker, also from Sidney Kimmel Medical College, is Amy Baumgardt, class of 2023. And let's see, wait a minute. She was originally from San Diego, worked in healthcare for 8 years before deciding to become a physician. She now plans to go into internal medicine. At Jefferson, she served as editor-in-chief of Inside Out, the university's literary arts journal, and volunteered with the Story Initiative, a group that creates individualized stories for children in group homes around the world. So Amy Baumgardt is going to give us her story, which is, I made the opening incision in a thyroidectomy.
My resident is looking at me, and he is holding the scalpel out, handle first, eyebrows raised. You are on the table before me, vulnerable, swaddled in sterile blue. The only part showing is the column of your neck, a structure almost unidentifiable, with your face and body completely covered. When we first met, you said, "I hope you learned something from me," attempting to be cheerful, trying to forget that you would soon be put to sleep for a life-changing surgery, that you would be putting your life into the hands of strangers. Make the opening incision, my resident says. It's not something medical students are usually asked to do, but today there's no one available but me. I can't actually say no. My resident is watching me with eyes that say, this is your grade on the line. Even though this isn't where I thought I would be today, I take the scalpel. I wanted to say no, but here we are. My hands feel strange, double-gloved, cut off from normal sensation. Most medical students would sell their left kidney to be me right now, but I don't want to be here. I put the scalpel to your flesh for the first time. Don't hesitate, I think to myself. It's the only thought I allow in my mind. Don't hesitate, commit. I press so delicately. The thinnest line appears, not even 1 millimeter deep. Stop, he says. I immediately freeze. Now press harder. You must only make a single incision through the first layer. I attempt again. Commit, I yell inside my own head. I press harder. Your skin parts before me. The blade almost glides across your throat. There is only the barest hint of resistance, as if I am passing instead through air. I am cutting your throat. I am literally cutting your throat. I am almost equal parts terrified and thrilled. Stop, he says again. My whole world is that tiny patch of your skin shining under the OR lights. I see nothing else. The OR staff, normally full of banters and jokes, are silent watchers. They fade from my notice. I cannot pay them attention. I must forget that you are there, underneath the neck before me. Be precise. You see the line I marked? You cut over it. The line is there for a reason. Now, continue from where you left off. I put the scalpel to your neck again. My hands are not shaking. My heart beats, forceful. It drives the knife between us. I do not blink. Your monitor in the background sings softly to me, a constant melody, reporting your life force. I forget that my feet and legs are tired from standing all day. My mind is empty. I see the line I have made and I continue onwards, pushing deeper, watching your flesh peel before me. In this moment, your life belongs to me. What I am doing to you is permanent. Yes, my resident says softly, his voice a ripple on my skin. In my chest, excitement is fighting fear as I cut. Exactly like that. Keep going, be careful. That's a vessel under the skin you don't want to. Good job, now keep going. That is perfect pressure. You're almost to the line, now stop. I reach the second purple line and I lift the blade. Now that it's done, it's almost shocking how easy it was. I cut exactly through the skin, exposing the muscle underneath. It is extraordinarily beautiful. The muscle is red, lying just beneath the fat, and it looks exactly like the drawings and pictures I have seen. My resident holds out his hand and I give the scalpel back to him. Handle first. He takes it. I'm glad to be rid of it. The scrub nurse hands me the retractor and I'm back to a role I know better. Like the lights coming up after a show, I come back into awareness of myself, of the space around me, and of you. You are still lying there, asleep, in need of my protection. When we first met, you said, I hope you learned something from me, attempting to be cheerful, and I laughed, but I didn't say, oh, and I might be holding the scalpel and cutting into you. Did you know that what you would be teaching me is that I don't want to be a surgeon? Because that feels clear to me, while I'm standing there, retracting with all my strength. I don't want to cut you again. I don't want to hurt you while you sleep here, under our power. I can all too easily put myself where you are, in the power of others. I'm not sorry that I made the opening incision on your surgery on the 3rd day of my 3rd year of training, but I wish you know that you did change a part of me as much as I changed a part of you.
That's our Jefferson team. Next we have our Drexel team up. Our next speaker is Trisha Gupta, class of 2025, who graduated from New York University with a Bachelor of Arts in English and American Literature and minors in Medieval and Renaissance Studies and Chemistry. She is in the Medical Humanities program at Drexel, through which she leads a book club, volunteers with organizations that read to children, tutors students, local students in writing and reading, and mentors refugees and immigrants in English. And her story is called A Second Bloom.
Thinking of this little bulb my mom got for Thanksgiving from her friend. One of those that doesn't need water or much of anything other than just sunlight to grow. She'd asked me if I wanted to bring it to Philly with me. And I had said no, as I'm really not one to keep plants. More so, one to appreciate them in the gardens and homes of others. Truth be told, though, I already had 2 bags full of my mom's food, thank you, Mom, to bring back with me to the city. So I really didn't want or need another weight adding to my load. So I left the bulb on the floor of my bedroom, assuming that my mom would figure it out. When I went home for winter break, I saw this little bulb, sprouting tall and proud and so elegant on my dresser at home next to my drawn curtains. And I felt so much compassion for this life blooming on its own, for no one but itself. And so I tended to it. Not very much, just observed it in the mornings and felt it at night to make sure that it was healthy. When I napped over break in the afternoons, I didn't draw my curtains. I didn't want to compromise my plant's sunshine time. Such love I felt. I held it the entire drive back to Philly in January and put it on my dining table, now having grown a large stalk. It bloomed, blossomed, and arose with the most beautiful amaryllis flowers. And then, after 3 days of absolute brilliance, it wilted and drooped. The box it came in said that it would not rebloom, since it was in a special wax bulb with all of its nutrients already packed in, just enough to sustain 1 bloom, which it had already done. It said to discard once the blooms wilt. But something felt so wrong about that. So I trimmed the stalk, carefully peeled back the artificial wax, and saw my plant's little roots trying to find soil, reaching for anything to house itself in. And so I bought soil, bought a pot stand, all for this plant that likely was never going to bloom ever again. But now here we are, a second stalk rising. I maintain that the first bloom was for no one but itself, but a little part of me believes that this second bloom is for me, because I believed that it would rise again. This is life. Thank you.
Thank you, Trisha. So our next speaker is Sami Abdul-Al, also class of 2025, who graduated in 2020 from the University of Pittsburgh with a degree in biology, and then spent a year serving adolescents in the UPMC Children's Hospital as an AmeriCorps member. Currently, he's the steering coordinator of St. Raymond's Hospital, Pennsylvania Student Clinic, if I got that right, which operates in a shelter for previously homeless adults. He's co-founder of Partners for a Healthy Community, a small nonprofit that addresses the digital gap facing senior citizens in Pennsylvania's coal region, and he enjoys bouldering, board games, and hiking. So Sammy's story is called Whistle With Me.
Thank you very much, everyone. If you would please remember the title at the end, I would appreciate it. Isn't it nice here? We haven't even seen the sunset yet. What makes it nice? Huh? Just open your eyes. I mean it. Why do you say it's nice? I don't know. I guess I don't have the words for it. I'm speechless. Speechless, you say. In case you aren't answering because you're overly self-conscious, I agree. It's nice. Now tell me why you think it's nice. All right. The first thing I notice is the ambience. It's calming here. If I stop looking around and I close my eyes, I feel like I'd be comfortable in the dark. It makes me enjoy the warmth of the sun, cool breeze passing by just a little bit more. What are you listening to out there? The river. When it's as far as it is, it feels like it's a backdrop. Painted on it are the rustling leaves high in the treetops. Sometimes they're wandering tunes or occasionally unsettled by some squirrels and birds going about their business. What do you hear? The birds, mostly. They remind me of someone. Do you mind if I ask who? Stop asking for my permission. We're past that. Fine, I'll do my best. It reminds me of my grandfather. When I was really little, he loved taking me on hikes with him. He used to pick me up and sit me on his shoulders so I could see everything he could. He loved to point out the birds in the canopies. That's so sweet. How is your grandpa? He's gone. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's okay. I miss him. It happened a few months ago. What? I hope he was comfortable when it happened. He was. I appreciate that. He had a stroke. I'd been napping, and I woke up to an email of all things from my dad, breaking the news to me. It was so sudden. I left to go home, and my brain kept replaying everything we'd learned about strokes over and over. When I finally got to the ER, he wasn't responsive, and that's when it really hit me. I knew I had spoken to my grandpa for the last time. There was this one moment I don't think I'll ever forget. My grandma was crying, my aunt was crying, and I came to her side and I held her hand. We cried together. And my grandpa opened his eyes and he turned his head. And whether it was him recognizing us or just seeing something human, he shed a tear and smiled so subtly. Not long after that, he started declining. I felt like knowing how things were happening helped me focus more on what was happening. In the end, I could accept his death, and I was there for my family. I can't imagine how tough of a time that must have been. I'm glad you're doing well, and I'm happy you were there for everyone when they needed you. Thanks. You know, life works mysteriously sometimes. Coincidentally, my brother and his wife just had a baby a few months ago. That's so exciting. They were born with something called laryngomalacia. Essentially, the cartilage of their larynx is soft and it still makes their breathing noisy. It's not dangerous in his case, but they make some really cute sounds because of it. There's a crib mobile with birds that glide in circles above the baby in the nursery. Sometimes they'll chirp like they're calling out to him. Other than that, they're a healthy baby. That's so good to hear. I held him for the first time, and it was so strange to hold someone so early in their life. Right now, all they do is eat, sleep, poop, cry, and inadvertently smile from time to time. Little by little, they're going to learn to grow because life demands that we do. Then, one day, they'll share what they learn so that others can live on with their memory. Just wondering, what's your favorite memory of your grandpa? Well, there was this time while we were on one of our hikes when he noticed some mockingbirds singing in the trees. He whistled, and they copied him. One after the other, they mocked one another until we gave them a new song. We whistled together for the rest of the trail, just so excited to hear the forest singing back to me. The sun is starting to set. It's so peaceful here. Thank you for bringing me. It was my pleasure. You know, my grandma used to say that the sun will always set after it rises. Interestingly enough, the sun will also always rise after it sets. It seems like We're left to enjoy the day between the two. Hey, do you think there are any mockingbirds out there right now? Only one way to find out.
So I guess we need to respond to that, right? Just if there are any out there. All right. Anyway, thank you, Sam. All right, so now we're moving to our Cooper team, our dual Olivia team from Cooper. We have Olivia Schreiber, who is in the class of 2024. Before entering medical school, she completed a master's degree in science writing at Johns Hopkins University, where she developed an interest in writing for the ear. In her spare time, she enjoys reading anything by Oliver Sacks, listening to Radiolab, cycling, and spending time in the sun. Olivia's story is Incidental Findings.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. There are many things that I would part ways with. Metered parking, student debt, reality television, just to name a few. Last year, I added my kidney to that list. My dad had been living with chronic renal failure for 4 years. And as much as I loved his peritoneal dialysis machine, which worked quietly at his bedside every night, cleansing his blood of abundant electrolytes and waste products, I also hated it because he became a prisoner to a machine every night, 7 days a week. I had to sign piles of paperwork. I met with a transplant nephrologist, a transplant coordinator, a transplant advocate. I had nearly 20 vials of blood drained out of a very precarious median cubital vein. I had to challenge my pancreas with a 2-hour glucose tolerance test. And to top it off, I had to get 24 hours worth of urine into one of those jugs who you know were designed for men and not for women. Everything checked out, even the cross match, arguably the most important step in the process. It was very likely that my healthy kidney would be an excellent match for my dad. He told all his doctors that his daughter was giving him a kidney. I know he was excited. I know he was proud. The only thing that remained was the CT scan. We had to check to make sure I had 2 kidneys. As the tech pushed the contrast into my veins, I felt my skin flush and a wave of nausea came over me. My mouth soured as the contrast hit my blood. Living donation would require many moments of discomfort. Needle sticks, CT scans, urine collections, the surgery itself. But they would all pale in comparison to the newer and freer life my dad would live once this kidney transaction was complete. Once the CT scan was read, the transplant team would go ahead and present my case for the final go-ahead. It took some time to hear back from Donna, who had become my go-to person in this process. Several weeks after the scan, she left me a message on my voicemail saying that we'd need to talk. To my surprise, my transplant advocate missed our final meeting, something that had been scheduled weeks prior. I called Donna a few times, but I couldn't reach her. So there I was, sitting at my dad's old desk, the daughter of a doctor, now a medical student herself, when Donna called. Her voice was off. It was lower, and she spoke very slowly. I tensed in my chair, and my breathing became very shallow. She told me the CT scan showed compression of my left renal vein by my superior mesenteric artery, and a right renal artery dissection that extended to the abdominal aorta. This was a convoluted and technical way of telling me that I was no longer a candidate for donation. You'll probably need to speak to a vascular surgeon, and you might need to go on aspirin, she said calmly. She ended our call with, "I'm sorry and good luck." I was so prepared, so excited to permanently change my body for my dad. I had come to understand and appreciate the risks that came with the surgery and the years to follow. the scars wouldn't be that big and my remaining kidney would grow to do the work of two. Some family and friends that were close to me supported my decision, others did not. But that didn't matter now, because I couldn't give my dad the future he so desperately needed and wanted. And despite having no say in my anatomical architecture and deviation from normal, I felt as though I had failed him. I called my dad, and all I could say was, "I'm sorry." I cried as I repeated the news Donna shared. "I can't give you my kidney, Dad." I could feel him deflate over the phone. He's typically not the emotional type, but he paused, maybe holding back some tears. I'll never know. We talked for a few minutes. "It's good they found this now," he said, mustering up some optimism. In his own way, he reassured me that everything would be okay and that we would both get through this. So yes, you can say that in attempting to help my dad, I helped myself. That is true, but it still stings. Sometimes when I stand in front of a mirror, I'll pull my shirt up, look down at my abdomen, and mentally flip off both my kidneys. One for me, one for my dad. Thank you.
Wow. All right, so our next storyteller, our second Olivia from Cooper, is, hang on a second here, Olivia Homer, class of 2023, who grew up in Voorhees, New Jersey. She holds a BA in psychology from Stanford University and is a future OB-GYN. Olivia has been crafting short stories and poems since she first learned to write, and has performed a variety of public speaking competitions and theatrical productions. Her other interests include reproductive justice, LGBTQ health equity, repeatedly rewatching The Parent Trap from the 1998 version, and finding the best soy latte in the city. So Olivia's story is Serenity. Olivia.
There was an unusual calmness spreading across the labor and delivery floor that fateful January morning. I was in the last week of my third-year OBGYN clerkship, and the warm blanket of calmness felt like reassurance and confidence. It didn't make me nervous. It probably should have. Our team was explaining the ins and outs of epidurals to a laboring mom when a soft but persistent alarm began sounding in the hallway. I had never heard this alarm before, but the chief resident on our team immediately stiffened her back. She stayed calm, explaining to the patient and unknowingly to me, "I'm sorry, but that alarm means that we have an emergency, so we have to leave now. We'll be back to continue this conversation later." She maintained her composure, and I followed her out of the room, still not fully understanding what might be waiting for us. I turned my back for one moment to shut the door behind me, and when I turned around, my resident was 20 feet down the hallway, running purposefully while other team members poured out from either side. I jogged to catch up, my mind racing. When a different patient presented in labor yesterday, screaming from the moment she arrived until her delivery 2 minutes later, we didn't ring an alarm. When the 16-year-old girl whose mother held her hand through 20 hours of labor was crying and telling us she simply wouldn't survive this birth, we didn't ring an alarm. These memories dragged me down like weights along my ankles as I shuffled into the triage room where a crowd was forming, surrounding a young woman who was screaming at the top of her lungs. At first, the unintelligible screaming was all that I could hear. It was piercing and terrified, and it filled my chest with ice. Other sounds found their way to me eventually, the nurse practitioner rattling off a history of sudden, severe abdominal pain and vaginal bleeding, the slop of ultrasound jelly being squeezed onto the rigid abdomen, the too slow rhythm of a struggling fetal heart. All of the sounds stopped for one brief, horrifying moment, a moment that never really ends in my memory of it, And then, all at once, chaos. Every nurse on the floor began running towards the operating room. The ice in my chest shattered and I leapt into action, pulling the side of the bed around the corner and gliding it alongside me as we raced down the hall. I finally had a moment to look at our patient. She was slight, save her gravid belly, and her chocolate eyes were frantic as she maintained a continuous, high-pitched scream. I wanted to squeeze her hand, steady her breathing, tell her it would be all right. But I didn't know that. I didn't know her, and I was out of time. These moments stretched for a lifetime, but we were out of time. I don't know what the last thing she heard before she was put to sleep was. It might have been the sound of the scrub technicians counting their blades, or the nurses calling for the NICU team to rush here immediately, or the doctors hushing the rest of the room as they searched for fetal heart tones. My greatest fear is that she heard the horrible sound of a provider asking the room what the patient's name was, and the harrowing silence that followed. Her name was Serenity. We didn't know that until we made our first incision. It took 3 minutes to reach the baby. 1 minute to remove him from the uterus and hand him to the waiting NICU team. 1 hour to bring his heart rate up in the room while his mother's body was sewn carefully shut. 2 more hours until he was declared dead. All the while, I stood in no man's land, between the NICU team and Serenity's open abdomen, shifting my focus from the fierce resuscitation attempts in one corner to the calm suturing in the other every few seconds. I cannot learn to save every life. I cannot learn to straddle those corners effortlessly without ice in my chest or lead on my feet. But I can learn to appreciate the rarity of calmness. I can learn to hold a hand when it needs to be held, no matter how small or how trembling my own may be. And we can learn your name. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. So now we have our temple team, starting with Nia Williams, class of 2024, and I'm sorry, 25. Misprinted the program. Nia was born and raised in Washington, D.C. She's a first-year medical student, poet, filmmaker, and performer. Her debut poetry chapbook, Cotton, spoken word album, and Mad Black Woman, and original shorts films are available on her website, which is listed in the program. Looking ahead, Nia remains committed to changing hearts and minds across the world, one word at a time. Nia Williams, her story is called Clocks.
Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. I still remember the wooden analog clock that hung in our family home. Its hands were constantly moving, swiping through time every second of the day. As a child, I'd stare in awe of the ways it displayed time and became time. Every day, when my mother returned home from work, standing in front of that clock felt like my moment to show off my genius of recognizing what was genius, what was obviously overlooked and underappreciated for all the ways it helped us throughout the day. But contrary to what my kindergarten teachers may have believed, I didn't leave the womb with this understanding. My mama worked diligently to teach me the ins and outs of that clock, of the time I had, of the opportunity I'd been given in this life. Understanding the basics allowed me to appreciate the complicated, allowed me to recognize when the clock began to slow, when its arms would twitch with fatigue, when its luscious brown wooden skin seemed dusty and worn. It taught me that knowing to read a clock wasn't merely a gift or privilege, but a necessity. It taught me that reading a clock was about memorizing its heartbeat. Tick-tock, 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 as much as it was about its flatline silence in need of new batteries. Only now that I'm older can I see the lesson hidden inside the nooks and crannies of my mother's teachings. Reading a clock is as basic and as important as reading ourselves. Respecting the gift of time is equivalent to respecting the gift of ourselves. When was the last time you listened to the sound of your own heartbeat? Can you recognize it in a crowded room? Would you notice if it skipped a beat? If your hands and arms twitch with fatigue? Would you recognize the signs of your own battery running low? Or would it only become clear when your body finally stopped, when your mind finally stopped, when you finally stopped? I didn't. I couldn't. And for a long time, my arms only moved to help other people reach their goals and follow their dreams and exploit the riches that time freely offers. I was so constant for everyone else that I became the decorative fixture in their lives. Quiet, unseen, almost non-existent except for the precious time I seeded, tended, kept alive. I kept time for them. I kept energy for them. They didn't know this, but I kept them. And it was only when my arms finally gave out and I was left depleted that I realized how many only noticed me when I no longer beat in service to them. How often I was overlooked and underappreciated. How often they did not take the time to learn how to read me. How often they only grunted with frustration when my fatigue inconvenienced them. How often they exclaimed, how could we forget the batteries again? The love again, the food again, the care again. How could we forget that clock again? But now, with all that I have in me, I stand tall and I do so defiantly. Because in the time that I spent in that one spot not moving, I learned how much I mean to me, with a ferocity that will live long past this moment we are standing in. I demand to be read with nothing less than fluency. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. I still remember that wooden analog clock that hung in our family home. Its hands were constantly moving, swiping through time every second of the day. I stare in awe of the ways it displayed time and became time. Now, I realize all along, the true clock, the real face I was enamored with was that of my own.
Thank you, Naya. All right, our second temple storyteller is Dr. Christopher Goodwin, who graduated from college with a major in anthropology and a minor in theater, and then spent a year evaluating baby weighing and immunization programs aimed at decreasing infant mortality in the remote jungle villages of Sulawesi, Indonesia. He attended medical school at the Dartmouth Brown program, became board certified in family medicine after residency at the University of Washington. And then he's written and performed a two-act, one-person play based on his experiences in Southeast Asia and a refugee camp in the Philippines. He spent 15 years providing inner-city care, including high-risk obstetrics and mental health care for the uninsured and underserved. Since 2018, he's been working in occupational health at Temple. Dr. Goodwin. Oh, his story. His story is called The Dilemma of the Dog.
Well, I love dogs, but not in my exam room when I'm treating a patient with a nasty wound And the only thing that looks worse and smells worse than the wound is the dog. It was a cold winter morning when a man and his dog came in from one of the homeless camps by the river. The man was limping painfully. At the time, I was working at a clinic in the Pacific Northwest, founded by a social worker whose defense of the underserved was militant. We refused care to no one. So when the man refused to be examined unless the dog stayed at his side, the dog stayed at his side. The man's eyes had the frightened look of a child in pain. Yet he looked 20 years older than his stated age. The sucked-in skin at his temples betraying the emaciation otherwise hidden under baggy, dirty clothes. There's the odor of unwashed body, campfire smoke, urine, and stale, fruity alcohol on his breath. But the dog was worse. A black lab shepherd mix, bald spots, oozing sores and crusts, and covered with dirt matted down with what looked like grease and blood and smelling like a rotting animal. "Sorry, Doc," the man said. "You rolled in a deer carcass on the way in." Now, the man's wound was bad. He passed out after drinking and shooting up, and a hot ember from his campfire jumped into his unlaced boot. A third-degree burn covered the entire outer ankle. It looked like dirty candle wax, a soggy ulcer in the middle, maybe down to the bone. "And if we don't get you to the hospital," I said to him, "you're going to lose that foot, maybe more." "I don't have anyone to take care of him," he said, "and he takes care of me. He's never let me down. Everybody else has. Nope, can't do it." So he limped out the door with a handful of antibiotics, a few protein shakes, and dog at his side. A week or so later, I went with a team from clinic on what we called river walks along the Spokane River to homeless camps. It was brutally cold, and we were about to turn back when we spotted them, guy and his dog, at a campfire, sitting side by side on an abandoned minivan bench seat. Miraculously, his wound wasn't really much worse, but it sure wasn't better. Redressed his wound, gave him some more antibiotics, a few protein shakes, and a new pair of socks. He invited me to squeeze in with them on the end of the bench, next to the dog. We sat for a moment together, silent. The slow, deep hush of the river, a breeze whispering in the tall Douglas firs and lodgepole pines, late afternoon sun sparkling on the water and casting long shadows. It was beautiful. But this dog stunk. Here we were, the three of us, crammed side by side on a 2-passenger bench seat in the woods, half mile from the nearest road. Maybe if I offered to take care of his dog, he'd go to the hospital. I looked at the dog looked at me. I could feel that dog looking at me, daring me to explain to my wife what I was thinking about doing. So I answered him with my eyes. We had a little conversation. "Well, first thing, you need a bath." "I could do that," his eyes said. "Now, you need to understand, we already have a household. We've got 5 kids, a nervous, underweight standard poodle who won't eat around other dogs, and an overweight dachshund who eats everything." Unfazed, he didn't break his stare, so I continued. "And a duck, 3 chickens, and a horse, and..." So the dog shrugged. "Dogs don't shrug," I protested out loud. "Huh? What was that?" the guy asked, leaning out from the other end of the bench. "Listen, if you don't go to the hospital, you're going to lose that foot. Listen, if you come back to clinic, I'll take your dog home with me and you can go to the hospital and..." "Wait," he interrupted me. "You take care of my dog? You do that for me?" Yeah, we'll figure something out." And hesitated. He's nah, Doc, you don't need to do that. Maybe I'll come by clinic in a couple days. Been thinking, might head home to Chicago, stay with Mom. She'll watch the dog. Then I'll go to a hospital. Hey, I might even go to rehab. Get clean. He never came back to clinic. Never saw him again. And for a long time after that, I wondered if he'd lost his foot or if he's even still alive. Couldn't I have been inconvenienced to take care of a smelly, dirty dog to save a foot, maybe a life? Well, it was about 6 months after that, we received a postcard at the clinic. Chicago skyline. Hey, made it home, staying with Mom, went to the hospital, went to rehab, got a job. Because you cared about my dog, you cared about me. Still have my foot, still have my dog. Thanks. And to think I thought that dog was the problem, turns out he was the answer.
Thank you, Dr. Goodman. So we're coming down the home stretch now. We have our 2 10 speakers. The first of the 2 is Omar Ani, class of 2024. He grew up in Syria before moving to New Jersey in 2015. He completed high school in the US and then matriculated to Rutgers University, where he majored in chemistry. Outside of school, he enjoys baking and cycling. And his story is called Names and Numbers.
Now, as you can probably tell, I just came from clinic, and today I was rotating over at Pensy Hospital. I was late because today I saw a patient that I saw 2 weeks ago. She was coming in with polysubstance use disorder. Fentanyl, xylazine, cocaine, alcohol, you name it. Now, for those of you who don't know, xylazine is a horse tranquilizer, which has been spreading rampantly around Philadelphia as the new drug, which is cheap to use and provides more effects than the more expensive heroin or cocaine. Now, when I read this extensive history 2 weeks ago, I thought, gee, what could this patient have more than she already does? I mean, what can I help with? She's just another one of those IV drug users, and I just shrugged and said, can I really help with anything? Is she gonna leave the hospital for the 4th time during this 6-month period? How am I gonna be able to get her out of her drug use and get her back to clean, get her back to functional in society? Now, after having these thoughts, I went in and saw the patient, and that took me back 10 years. I was 13, the Syrian civil war was going on, and the rebels decided to attack the city for the first time to try and take over the street that I was living in from the government forces. I woke up at 2 a.m. My parents directed me to their room. The closet was against the window. With every explosion, the windows would shake, and multiple windows had broken already. We were afraid that the windows would break and we'd be covered with shrapnel. I sat on the floor feeling helpless. I was 13, just starting to develop a sense of what the world is really about, having my own hopes and dreams, my own desires to grow up, to learn, to help others. But I was also very selfish. I was thinking that if I was to die that day, if I was to wake up, or not even wake up, to not see the light the next morning, that I'd be just another one of those numbers on TV that I'd see every day, contributing to the death toll, 206, 207, 208. I was a number. I wasn't a name. And at that moment, I felt helpless. I couldn't cry. I was just thinking, what would I do the next day if I was to wake up? What would I do if I was to see the light again, coming from behind that closet that covered the window in the room that we sat in? I woke up the next day. The explosions were loud enough throughout the night to trigger the car theft alarms, but I woke up. And that was a pivotal moment in my life. I decided that every interaction that I was going to go through going forward was going to be an intentional interaction, bringing people to their forefront, to the conscious world, and helping them realize that they're more than just a number. So when I was thinking of this IV drug user as just another one of those IV drug users who's never going to go back to clean, I was, in a sense, committing something, a crime of some sort, that I told myself I'd never commit after being numerated, after being translated into a number. So I walked into the room, asked the patient what I could do to get her back to clean. We had an hour-long conversation about her kid, about her previous life, about how she broke her back and how that started her into opioids and many other drugs. Now, that kept her into the hospital for 4 days. Last time, she left 1 day into her hospital stay. But then she left the hospital again. I felt sad. I felt like I could have done something more. Maybe I could have brought her that laptop charger that she requested a day earlier, which I did get a laptop charger, it was just the wrong one. And I felt like I, in some sense, could not help that patient. Well, today that changed. That patient came back, and she's back at a different hospital. I saw her in 2 different rotations. I walked into the room, I said, "Hi, Miss Jones." She looked at me. She was still delirious from the drugs that she had recently used. And she goes, "Omar, I told my whole family about you. I didn't expect to see you here." And then I looked back at her and I said, "Well, I told you you'd stick around." And then she said, "I think I can do it this time. I think I'm gonna go clean." Now she's still in the hospital and she's not clean yet. She's still on rehab going towards the Vivitrol shot, which is hopefully a long-term solution to her addiction. But my hope is that this will be her last hospital stay, that I'll be trying another time to make her feel like something more than a number, like a name, like a person, like an individual who deserves the full care that anyone else would deserve, regardless of whether they're an IV drug user or not. Thank you.
And finally, for a final storyteller, we have Lee Finnegan, who is a resident of PGY3 in pediatrics, 2019 graduate of Penn Medicine, and she plans to pursue a fellowship in neonatology. I'm sorry, her story is Sticking Points.
I'm last, so I assume that means I can take all the time I want. Great. So it's hour 18 of a 28-hour call during my intern year, and a patient I'm cross-covering has just spiked a fever. She's 2 years old, and a few days earlier, she'd been diagnosed with leukemia. And this fever means that we need to get a blood culture and start her on antibiotics in case she might be septic. There's no overnight phlebotomy at my hospital, so if one of your patients needs a blood draw, you have to do it. And at this point, I had done a handful of blood draws in highly controlled situations on well-hydrated, healthy adult co-residents. I had never done one on a squirmy, chubby toddler, much less in the middle of the night when I'd been at work since 6 a.m. But I went into the room and I introduced myself to the patient and her mom, who had never met before, or to the patient's mom and grandma, who had never met before. And I told them what we had to do. And they were not on board with the plan. They didn't know me, they didn't know why we needed to do this, and it took a long time to explain to them and eventually get them to reluctantly agree to the antibiotics in the blood draw. And then they asked me who was gonna take the blood, and I told them that I was. And that's when I learned that both the mom and the grandma were phlebotomists. So I go get my supplies, and I commit the cardinal sin of procedures, which is that I only got 1 needle. Medical students, let this be a lesson, you always get more than 1 needle. And the needles that we have at my hospital are the butterfly needles that have the button that you push to retract once you're done. And whoever designed these needles inexplicably made that button the same color and material as the rest of the butterfly. So I get myself set up, I find something that looks like it might be a vein that I can poke in her chubby little toddler hand, and I'm holding my needle, and I am so nervous, I am white knuckling this needle. I'm squeezing it so tightly, and just as I'm about to pierce the skin, my pointer finger moves 1 millimeter in the wrong direction, and click, the needle retracts. I've never wanted the earth to swallow me whole as much as I did right then. Of all the times this had to happen, why did it have to be in front of the multi-generational family of phlebotomists? And of course, I only got the one needle, and I just retracted it. So my senior has to go get more supplies, and she comes back with like a comical number of needles. She's got like 2 of every size, there's an IV, I think there's a spinal needle in there. It's unhelpful at that point. But I get an appropriately sized one, and I try again. This time holding it all the way on the edges of that butterfly, nowhere near that extremely sensitive, strangely well camouflaged button. And this time I actually do pierce the skin. And of course, once I do, the kid starts screaming and thrashing and kicking, and I'm not getting a flash. And the patient's grandma, who's been a phlebotomist for longer than I've been on this earth, tries to help me. She crouches down behind me. She puts her face right next to mine so that she can see from my angle. And she is directing me. She's like, okay, go a little to the left. She's like palpating to see where the vessel is. Maybe you want to go a little deeper. Oh, I think that's too deep. And I'm not getting any blood, and I'm digging around in the poor kid's hand, and the kid is screaming, and her mom says, that's enough. You're not sticking her again. Storms out of the room, she's sobbing. So I give the family some space. I go try to come up with a new plan. And a few minutes later, I walk out of the workroom, and I see someone I've never seen before, wearing blue phlebotomy scrubs, carrying a full blood culture bottle. I don't know who this mystery phlebotomist was, or what she was doing there in the middle of the night, or if there's some like secret network of phlebotomists in Philadelphia that my patient's family had access to that I didn't. But I was so relieved that I didn't have to go back to this family with some new plan that they weren't gonna like. And the patient's mom was sitting in the hallway, and she turns to me, tears in her eyes, and she says, I'm really sorry I yelled at you back there. A few days earlier, that mom's entire world had ended. Whatever she was before that, on that day she became the mother of a cancer patient. And the parents of sick kids are robbed of the ability to act on their most basic instinct as parents, which is to protect their children from suffering. That mom probably could have gotten that blood in 10 seconds. The kid would have barely felt a pinch. And instead, she had to sit there and watch a well-meaning but inexperienced intern inflict pain on her baby, knowing that with this new cancer diagnosis, there was a whole universe of pain that was still to come for her. I totally understand why she yelled at me. And I told her that she had absolutely nothing to apologize for, and that I was glad that we had the blood and that we'd start the antibiotics because that was the safest thing for her kid. And then I went back to the workroom, and I opened up one of those like half-dozen spare needles, and I studied it to make sure that I never, ever accidentally hit that button again.
Thank you to all of our storytellers. So now we need our ballots to be distributed. In a minute, you should have a card, and if you look at your program, you can do it by number. The third place is from the Mooner Museum gift shop. Great women of science. A wonderful bag. This is Amy Baumgarh. And in second place, we have a plush heart storyteller, Olivia Homer from. Now our winner, we need a true drum roll here, is, thank you. In first place, the winner of the gold plush heart is Christopher Goodwin. tonight, what I'd like to do is just invite all of our storytellers up here. I'm just going to congratulate everyone. Congratulations. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you. Okay, so we have a round of applause.